The auction house smelled of old paper and disappointment. Rosa Delgado sat in the back row of folding chairs, her daughter Lucia pressed against her side, 8 years old, and trying to understand why they were spending their last afternoon in a room full of strangers bidding on things nobody wanted. The auctioneer's voice had gone hoarse 3 hours ago, reduced to a monotone that made even potentially valuable items sound like garbage. He'd moved through estate sales and tax seizures with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book, and the crowd had thinned from 40 people to maybe 12, most of them dealers looking for copper wire or salvageable lumber. Rosa checked her phone for the 7th time in 10 minutes. The screen showed 4:47 p.m. and a bank balance that made her stomach twist. $847. That number represented everything. Rent due in 5 days, groceries for 2 weeks, gas to get to the restaurant where she worked doubles 4 nights a week, and the school supplies Lucia needed for 3rd grade starting next month. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago. Marco had left with his new girlfriend, a dental hygienist named Jennifer who wore perfume that cost more than Rosa made in a week. He'd promised child support, had signed papers saying he'd send $400 monthly. Rosa had received exactly 1 payment before Marco moved to Arizona without forwarding address, leaving her and Lucia in a 1-bedroom apartment in San Pedro with walls so thin they could hear their neighbor's television through the plaster. Lot 247, the auctioneer announced, consulting his clipboard with visible exhaustion. Maritime salvage item. 1 barge, approximately 40 feet in length, currently resting at 22 feet depth in Los Angeles Harbor near Terminal Island. Purchased at county auction in 1987, never recovered. Property of estate of Herbert Morrison, deceased. Salvage rights transfer with purchase. Opening bid $1. The room fell into the particular silence that accompanies items nobody wants. A barge underwater for 37 years wasn't salvage. It was an environmental liability waiting to happen. Recovery costs would run into tens of thousands. Any cargo had long since rotted or been stolen by divers. The thing was essentially a submerged hazard that the county wanted off its books. Rosa's hand went up before her brain could stop it. The auctioneer blinked, clearly surprised anyone had bid at all. We have $1. Do I hear 2? Silence stretched for 15 seconds. The auctioneer tried once more, a formality. Going once at $1. Going twice. Sold to bidder 73 for $1. The gavel came down with a crack that seemed far too definitive for such a small purchase. Rosa's heart hammered her chest. She'd just spent $1 they couldn't afford on a sunken barge she'd never seen, couldn't reach, and had no earthly idea how to recover. Lucia tugged on her sleeve, her voice carrying the careful concern children develop when they've watched their parents struggle. Mama, why did you buy a boat that's underwater? Rosa didn't have a good answer. The bid had been impulse, exhaustion, maybe the desperate logic of someone who'd been drowning herself for so long that buying something literally underwater felt grimly appropriate. But looking at her daughter's face, she tried to find words that sounded less insane than the truth. Sometimes, Mija, opportunities hide where nobody else is looking. That barge has been down there since before I was born. Maybe there's something valuable inside. Maybe we can sell the metal. Maybe, she caught herself before admitting she didn't know what she was doing. Maybe it'll be an adventure. The skepticism in Lucia's 8-year-old eyes suggested she'd inherited her father's practical streak rather than her mother's occasional recklessness. But the child nodded, accepting the explanation because children had to believe their parents knew what they were doing, even when evidence suggested otherwise. Rosa paid her $1 at the cashier window and received a manila folder containing the title transfer, original purchase document from 1987, and a yellowed survey map showing the barge's approximate location marked with an X that looked more like someone's rough guess than precise coordinates. The cashier, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain, handed over the documents with an expression that mixed pity and confusion. You planning to raise that thing? Her tone suggested this was a rhetorical question, because salvage companies quoted Herbert's estate something like $80,000 just to bring it up. That's not counting disposal fees or environmental assessments. Rosa's smile felt like it might crack her face. I'm still figuring out the details. Well, good luck with that. Herbert bought it thinking there was Spanish gold or something romantic like that. Spent 20 years telling everyone at the yacht club he'd found treasure, but never had the money to prove it. Died last year, still talking about it. Family thinks he was delusional, that the barge is just some old cargo hauler that sank during a storm. The cashier's words followed Rosa and Lucia out into the late afternoon heat of August in Los Angeles. The air tasted of exhaust and ocean salt, the particular combination that marked their neighborhood as caught between industrial port and residential sprawl, belonging fully to neither. They drove home in Rosa's 2004 Honda Civic, the car's air conditioning having given up the ghost 2 summers ago. Lucia rode with her window down, her dark hair whipping in the wind, the folder of barge documents clutched in her lap like it might blow away if she loosened her grip. Their apartment occupied the second floor of a building that had been painted beige in 1983 and hadn't been painted since. The stairs creaked under their weight. The lock on their door stuck until you jiggled it just right. Inside, the space measured maybe 650 square feet. Living room that doubled as Rosa's bedroom via a pull-out couch. One actual bedroom where Lucia slept, a kitchen barely large enough for 2 people to stand, and a bathroom with tiles that had cracked into interesting patterns from decades of water damage. But it was theirs, or at least it was theirs for 5 more days until rent came due, and Rosa had to somehow produce $1,200 she didn't have. Lucia spread the barge documents across their kitchen table, studying the survey map with the intense focus she brought to schoolwork. Mama, this map shows the barge is near a place called Terminal Island. Is that far from here? Maybe 20 minutes if traffic's good. Can we go look at it? Rosa started to explain that looking at something 22 feet underwater required equipment they didn't own and skills she didn't possess. Then she stopped herself. What else did they have to do tonight? She wasn't scheduled to work until tomorrow. Lucia had finished her summer reading. The rent wasn't going to get paid faster if they sat here worrying about it. Get your shoes on. Let's go see what $1 buys in Los Angeles Harbor. Terminal Island sat at the southern edge of the port complex, connected to the mainland by 2 bridges and surrounded by a landscape of shipping containers, cranes, and industrial facilities that operated 24 hours. The sun was setting by the time Rosa navigated through the maze of access roads, painting the water orange and gold, making even the oil-stained harbor look almost beautiful. The survey map's coordinates were vague, pointing to a section of water near an abandoned dock that looked like it had been condemned sometime during the Reagan administration. Rosa parked as close as she could get, which meant 300 feet away behind a chain-link fence marked with signs warning about trespassing and unauthorized access. Lucia climbed out of the car and walked to the fence, pressing her face against the metal diamonds, staring at the water beyond. Is our barge under there? Somewhere around here, according to the map. How deep is 22 feet? About as deep as a 2-story building is tall. Lucia processed this, her imagination clearly working. What if there is treasure? What if Mr. Morrison was right and there's gold or something? Rosa joined her daughter at the fence, both of them staring at water that revealed nothing about what lay beneath its surface. The practical part of her brain, the part that had balanced impossible budgets and made rent appear from nowhere for 8 months, insisted this was fantasy. Sunken barges didn't contain treasure. Spanish galleons full of doubloons existed in movies, not in industrial harbors surrounded by container ships. But another part of her, smaller and quieter but persistent, whispered that she'd bought this chance for $1. And maybe, just maybe, Herbert Morrison hadn't been entirely delusional. I don't know what's down there, Mija, but we're going to find out. The words felt like a promise neither of them could afford to break. The next morning arrived too early and too hot. Rosa's alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., pulling her from dreams of drowning in water that tasted like salt and rust and failure. She dressed in the dark, not wanting to wake Lucia, and left the apartment before the city fully woke. The restaurant where she worked was called the Golden Coast, which was ironic since they were nowhere near actual coastline and the only thing golden was the mustard they bought in bulk from Costco. She worked breakfast and lunch shifts, serving tourists and dock workers and the occasional businessman who'd wandered too far from the nicer establishments downtown. Her manager, Tony Guzman, was already there when she arrived, counting register drawers with the suspicious efficiency of someone who'd caught employees stealing before. He looked up when Rosa walked in, his expression doing that thing it always did, softening slightly with something that might have been attraction if Rosa had any energy left to notice or care. "Rosa, good morning. You look tired." "I'm always tired, Tony." "Yeah, but today you look extra tired." He finished counting 20s and rubber-banded them with practiced hands. "Everything okay?" How to answer that question honestly? No, everything was not okay. She was 5 days from eviction. Her ex-husband had vanished to Arizona with a dental hygienist. Her daughter was wearing shoes 2 sizes too small because Rosa couldn't afford new ones until next payday. And yesterday she'd bought a sunken barge for $1 because her life had become so desperate that underwater salvage seemed like reasonable planning. "Everything's fine, just didn't sleep great." Tony studied her with the expression of someone who knew he was being lied to but lacked the authority or relationship to push harder. "Well, if you need anything, you can ask." Rosa nodded non-committally and moved into the prep kitchen. The morning rush started at 6 a.m. and didn't slow until after 10 o'clock. For hours of taking orders, delivering plates, refilling coffee, smiling at customers who treated her like furniture or worse, like charity case who should be grateful for tips that sometimes reached 15%. During her break at 9:30, Rosa sat in the alley behind the restaurant and pulled out her phone. She'd been thinking about the barge all morning, the question circling her mind like a shark. How did someone with no money, no equipment, and no experience recover something from the bottom of Los Angeles Harbor? Google provided approximately 847,000 results for salvage underwater vessel. Most of them involve professional companies with specialized equipment, insurance requirements, and costs starting at $50,000. The forums she found were full of recreational divers discussing wrecks and salvage laws, but nothing that helped someone in her situation. She was about to give up when she found a post from 6 months ago on a diving forum. The author, someone calling themselves Harbor Diver 87, had written about exploring Terminal Island wrecks as a hobby. The post included photographs of underwater structures, old pilings, and what looked like the remains of small boats. Rosa clicked on a user's profile and found an email address listed publicly. Email protected. She composed a message before she could overthink it. "Hi, my name is Rosa Delgado. I recently purchased salvage rights to a barge that sank near Terminal Island in 1987. I don't have professional equipment or much money, but I'm trying to figure out if there's anything worth recovering before I give up on the whole thing. The original owner thought there might be valuable cargo, but I don't know if that's realistic or just wishful thinking. Would you be willing to look at the location and tell me if it's even worth pursuing? I can't pay much, but I can offer dinner and gratitude. Thanks for any help you can provide." She hit send before fear could stop her, then returned to the lunch rush that filled the restaurant with noise and heat and the smell of frying oil that would cling to her clothes until she showered that night. The response came 3 hours later while Rosa was clearing table 7. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. She waited until she reached the kitchen to check it, expecting spam or a polite refusal. Instead, she found this. "Rosa, interesting timing. I've actually seen your barge while diving that area. Most people don't know it's there because it's partially buried in silt and covered in marine growth. I'd be happy to take another look if you're serious about salvage. Free of charge. I dive for fun anyway. This weekend work for you?" The sender had signed off as Kevin Chun, harbor diver and occasional treasure hunter. Rosa's hands shook slightly as she typed her response. "This weekend will be perfect. Thank you so much. Where should we meet?" Kevin's reply came immediately, like he'd been waiting for her. Answer: Terminal Island, near the old dock off Barracuda Street. Saturday morning, 8 a.m. Bring that survey map if you have it. And Rosa, I should tell you up front, most sunken vessels this old don't contain anything valuable. Marine salvage is expensive and usually disappointing. But I'm curious about this one. The barge's position and the way it's settled suggest it might have been deliberately scuttled rather than accidentally sunk. That's unusual for cargo vessels. So yeah, let's take a look. Rosa read the message 3 times, parsing Kevin's warning that expectations should stay low, while simultaneously feeling the first flutter of hope she'd experienced in months. Deliberately scuttled. That meant someone had intentionally sunk it, which meant maybe they'd been hiding something worth hiding. She worked the rest of her shift, moving through orders on autopilot, her mind already at Saturday morning, already imagining what might wait beneath 22 feet of harbor water. That evening, after picking up Lucia from the neighbor who watched her during Rosa's work hours, after eating dinner that consisted of rice, beans, and the chicken thighs Rosa had bought on sale, after helping with homework and tucking her daughter into bed, Rosa sat at their kitchen table with the barge document spread before her. The original purchase receipt from 1987 showed that Herbert Morrison had paid $15,000 at auction for salvage rights to maritime vessel identified as Dock 7 barge, approximate length 40 feet, sunk February 1984. The description was minimal, offering no information about cargo, previous ownership, or circumstances of sinking. But attached to the receipt was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile, protected in a plastic sleeve that had probably cost more than the dollar Rosa paid for the whole folder. The clipping came from a Los Angeles Times, dated February 23, 1984. The headline read, "Mystery barge sinks near Terminal Island. Owner unknown." Rosa read the article with increasing fascination. According to the report, Harbor Patrol had discovered the barge partially submerged near an abandoned dock. No distress calls had been made. No owner came forward to claim it. The vessel carried no registration numbers, no identifying marks, nothing that would indicate where it came from or who operated it. Harbor authorities had attempted to raise it for identification purposes, but found the cost prohibitive for an unclaimed vessel. After 6 months of legal limbo, they'd auctioned the salvage rights to recoup administrative costs. Herbert Morrison had been the only bidder. The article included one more detail that made Rosa's pulse quicken. A Harbor Patrol officer, quoted anonymously, had mentioned that divers inspecting the barge reported seeing unusual cargo in the hold, but couldn't identify it due to poor visibility and limited bottom time. The cargo had been secured with chains and covered with tarps, suggesting someone had taken care to protect whatever was inside. Rosa pulled out her phone and searched for information about Terminal Island in the early 1980s. What she found painted a picture of a chaotic period in the port's history. The area had been undergoing massive reconstruction. Old facilities were being demolished and replaced. Smuggling had been a persistent problem, with everything from drugs to stolen artifacts moving through the harbor's less monitored sections. A barge with no identification deliberately sunk in a remote corner of the harbor, carrying secured cargo nobody could identify. It added up to something deliberate, something hidden. Maybe Herbert Morrison hadn't been delusional after all. Lucia appeared in the doorway, clutching the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 3. "Mama, I can't sleep. I keep thinking about the treasure barge." Rosa smiled despite her exhaustion. "It's not a treasure barge, Mija. It's probably just old equipment or building materials." "But maybe it's not." Lucia climbed into Rosa's lap, too big for it really, but still young enough to need the comfort of physical closeness. "Mr. Morrison thought there was something important down there, and you bought it because you thought so too." "I bought it because it cost $1 and I was having a weird day." "No." Lucia's voice carried surprising certainty. "You bought it because you're brave. Because we need help and you're trying to find it." "That's not weird, Mama. That's smart." Rosa held her daughter close, feeling the weight of 8 years of life pressed against her chest, warm and trusting and completely dependent on Rosa making good decisions. Buying a sunken barge didn't qualify as a good decision by any objective measure. But Lucia's faith, misplaced as it might be, made Rosa want to try harder, dig deeper, believe a little more in possibilities that rational thought would dismiss. Saturday morning, someone's going to dive down and look at the barge for us. A professional diver who knows the harbor. We'll find out what's really down there, okay? No more mysteries. What if it is treasure? What do we do then? Then we figure out together. Same way we figure out everything else. Lucia fell asleep in Rosa's arms 20 minutes later, lulled by the rhythm of her mother's heartbeat and the comfort of promises neither of them could guarantee would be kept. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of California sunshine that made everything look more hopeful than it had any right to be. Rosa dressed in practical clothes, jeans, a t-shirt, sneakers that had seen better days, and helped Lucia into similar attire. They ate breakfast quickly, cereal with the last of the milk, and left the apartment by 7:15 to beat traffic. Terminal Island looked different in morning light, less industrial, more like an abandoned frontier where nature and human infrastructure fought for dominance. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their cries mixing with the distant sound of container cranes and ship horns from the active sections of the port. Rosa parked near the chain-link fence, and they walked along it until they found a section where the gate hung open, held that way by rust and time rather than any official welcome. A pickup truck sat nearby, its bed loaded with diving equipment that looked professional despite visible wear. A man in his early 40s emerged from behind the truck, pulling a wetsuit up to his waist. He was Asian American, lean and muscular in the way of people who did physical work regularly. He waved when he saw Rosa and Lucia approaching. "Rosa Delgado? I'm Kevin Chun, and this must be your daughter, Lucia." The child extended her hand with the formal politeness Rosa had taught her, and Kevin shook it with appropriate seriousness. "Pleasure to meet you, Lucia. Your mom tells me you two own a sunken barge. We bought it for $1 at an auction." Kevin's smile was genuine. "Best dollar you ever spent, assuming there's anything down there worth recovering. I won't lie to you. Most of the time these old wrecks are just junk. But I've been diving this harbor for 10 years, and your barge has always intrigued me. The way it's settled, the fact that nobody claimed it, the rumors about what might be inside." Rosa handed him the survey map. "This is what we have. Not much to go on." Kevin studied it briefly, then nodded. "I know exactly where this is. I've actually touched parts of it during previous dives. The barge is sitting at about 24 feet, slightly deeper than your map indicates. It's partially buried, which has protected it from salvagers and kept the structure relatively intact. I'm going to do a preliminary survey, get some underwater photos, maybe see if I can access the hold. Is that dangerous?" Lucia's concern was immediate. "All diving carries some risk, but this is shallow water, and I've got all my safety equipment. Your mom is paying me in conversation and gratitude, which is honestly better than money for something I do anyway." Kevin finished pulling on his wetsuit and started loading gear. "I'll be down for about 40 minutes. You two can watch from the dock if you want, though there won't be much to see except bubbles." Rosa and Lucia followed Kevin to the water's edge where an aluminum ladder provided access to the harbor surface. The water looked murky, green-brown with suspended sediment, completely opaque beyond the first few inches. Kevin checked his equipment with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Regulator, tank pressure, dive computer, underwater camera mounted to his mask. "Wish me luck." He stepped off the dock and disappeared into the water with barely a splash. Rosa and Lucia sat on the dock's edge, their feet dangling above water they couldn't see through, waiting for news about cargo that might not exist, hoping for treasure that probability insisted would be disappointment. Minutes stretched into quarter hours. Lucia counted Kevin's bubbles when they surfaced, turning it into a game to pass time. Rosa checked her phone compulsively, though she didn't know who she expected to hear from or what news might arrive that would be more important than this moment. At 37 minutes, Kevin surfaced, water streaming from his mask. He swam to the ladder with strong, economical strokes and climbed out, immediately removing his regulator. His first words were not what Rosa expected. "You need to call a lawyer before you do anything else, and probably a marine archaeologist, because what's in that barge isn't cargo. It's a collection, and if I'm right about what I saw, you don't own a piece of junk. You own something that's going to change your life." Rosa's hands had gone numb. "What did you see?" Kevin pulled off his mask, his expression mixing excitement with something that looked like concern. "Obsidian mirrors. At least 50 of them, maybe more. They're wrapped in oilcloth that's partially deteriorated, but the mirrors themselves look intact. And Rosa, if they're authentic Aztec mirrors, which the craftsmanship suggests they might be, you're not looking at thousands of dollars. You're looking at millions, maybe hundreds of millions. The dock seemed to tilt beneath Rosa's feet. Lucia grabbed her hand, squeezing with surprising strength. That can't be right. Why would Aztec mirrors be in Los Angeles Harbor? I have no idea. But here's what I know. The Aztec Empire produced obsidian mirrors as both functional items and sacred objects. Most were destroyed by Spanish conquistadors who viewed them as pagan artifacts. The ones that survived are extremely rare and worth fortunes to museums and collectors. If your barge contains even 20 authentic mirrors, you're sitting on one of the most significant archaeological finds in North America in decades. Kevin unzipped a waterproof pouch on his belt and pulled out his underwater camera. He scrolled through images on the small screen, then turned it so Rosa could see. The photographs were murky, lit by Kevin's dive light cutting through green water and sediment. But even through the poor visibility, Rosa could make out shapes wrapped in darkened cloth, and where the cloth had torn away, smooth black surfaces caught the light like captured darkness given form. I only got into the forward section of the hold. There are at least 3 more compartments I couldn't access without better equipment and more time. But Rosa, based on what I could see, you're looking at the largest cache of pre-Columbian mirrors ever found outside Mexico. The question isn't whether this is valuable. The question is how you protect it, legally and physically, before someone tries to take it from you. Rosa's vision blurred slightly. The past 8 months had been survival, counting pennies, stretching meals, making rent appear from nothing. The idea that she now owned something worth millions felt less real than the sunken barge had when she bid $1. Lucia's voice cut through Rosa's shock with childlike clarity. "Mama, does this mean we don't have to move?" The question brought everything into sharp focus. Yes, this could mean they didn't have to move. It could mean paying rent for years in advance. It could mean Lucia getting new shoes that fit, going to college someday, having the life Rosa had promised her when she was born. But it could also mean lawyers and disputes, and people like Marco coming back to claim pieces of something they'd abandoned. It could mean the county challenging her ownership. It could mean museums claiming the mirrors belonged in institutions rather than private hands. It could mean theft, or worse, from people who saw $100 million artifacts as worth killing for. Kevin seemed to read her thoughts. This is going to get complicated fast. The good news is salvage law is pretty clear. You purchased legitimate rights to whatever's in that barge. The bad news is Aztec artifacts might fall under different regulations. You need expert guidance immediately. I can't afford a lawyer. I have $800 in my checking account. Then find one who works on contingency. Because Rosa, what's down there is real. And word is going to get out the moment anyone official gets involved. You need to move fast and smart. Kevin pulled out his phone. I know someone. Dr. Patricia Reyes. She's a maritime archaeologist at UCLA who specializes in pre-Columbian artifacts. She's also passionate about making sure discoveries benefit the people who find them rather than getting swallowed by institutions. Let me call her. The conversation that followed happened in Spanish too rapid for Lucia to follow. Kevin's fluency, surprising Rosa until she remembered Los Angeles, was full of people who moved between languages like switching radio stations. He spoke for 5 minutes, listened for 3, then hung up and turned to Rosa with something approaching urgency. Dr. Reyes can meet you this afternoon at her office. She's willing to consult for free initially because she says if these mirrors are authentic, this is the most important find since King Tut's tomb. Her exact words. But Rosa, she also warned me that you're about to have problems. The moment this goes public, everyone's going to want a piece. The county, the Mexican government, private collectors, museums, treasure hunters, and worse. You purchased legal salvage rights, but that doesn't mean people won't try to take this from you through legal challenges or other means. Rosa looked at her daughter, 8 years old, and holding her hand like that could keep the world from spinning out of control. She thought about their apartment with 5 days until eviction. She thought about Marco in Arizona, sending no child support and no apology. She thought about working doubles at the Golden Coast for tips that never quite covered bills. And she thought about Herbert Morrison, who'd spent 20 years telling anyone who'd listen that he'd found treasure, only to die before proving it to the people who'd called him delusional. Tell Dr. Reyes I'll be at UCLA at 2 o'clock. And Kevin, thank you. I don't know what happens next, but thank you for diving, for believing this might be real. Kevin was already gathering his equipment, moving with purpose. I'm going to keep this quiet for now, but I'm also going to document everything. If this goes to court or gets challenged, you'll need evidence of discovery. I'll write up my dive report today and get you copies of all my photos. And Rosa, he paused, wetsuit half unzipped. Be careful. $100 million discoveries make people desperate. Don't tell anyone else about this until you have legal protection in place. They left Terminal Island as the morning sun climbed higher, turning the harbor into a mirror of light that revealed nothing about the treasures hidden beneath its surface. Rosa drove in silence, processing implications she couldn't fully grasp, while Lucia stared out the window with the unseeing gaze of someone whose imagination had begun working overtime. Mama, are we rich now? I don't know, Mija. It's complicated. But Mr. Kevin said the mirrors are worth millions. He said they might be worth millions if they're authentic, and if we can legally keep them, and if we can afford to recover them, and if 1,000 other things go right. Nothing's certain yet. Lucia processed this with 8-year-old logic. But something changed. Yesterday, we had a sunken boat nobody wanted. Today, we have treasure everybody's going to want. That's different. Rosa couldn't argue with that assessment. Something fundamental had shifted in the 37 minutes Kevin spent underwater. Their lives had been balanced on the edge of disaster for 8 months, held together by Rosa's stubborn refusal to give up and Lucia's innocent belief that her mother could fix anything. Now they owned something that might actually be worth the hope Herbert Morrison had carried for 2 decades. They owned possibility made tangible in the form of 50 obsidian mirrors wrapped in deteriorating oilcloth at the bottom of Los Angeles Harbor. But possibility was a double-edged blade. It could cut them free from poverty, or it could cut them apart if they didn't handle it carefully. Rosa parked outside their apartment with 3 hours until the UCLA meeting. She needed to research, to understand what they were facing, to prepare for conversations with experts who would know immediately that she was out of her depth. Inside the apartment, she opened her laptop, a 5-year-old machine held together with electrical tape and prayer, and started searching. Aztec Obsidian mirrors returned results that made her breath catch. The British Museum held one mirror valued at over $15 million. The Smithsonian had 2, their combined worth estimated at $45 million. A private collector had purchased one at auction in 2019 for $87 million, setting a record for pre-Columbian artifacts. If Kevin was right about 50 mirrors in the barge, the most conservative estimate put total value around $750 million. Some articles suggested that a cache of that size could reach $1 billion because rarity increased exponentially with quantity. Rosa's hand shook as she scrolled through photographs of similar mirrors. Polished obsidian reflecting light like captured night. Intricate carvings around the edges depicting gods and glyphs that scholars had spent lifetimes interpreting. Objects that had been held by Aztec priests and nobles, used for divination and ceremony, destroyed by Spanish conquistadors who saw the devil in their black surfaces. And 50 of them, maybe more, sitting in a barge she'd bought for $1 because nobody else wanted it. The irony wasn't lost on her. In a city where people spent millions on houses and cars and lives of conspicuous consumption, Rosa Delgado, single mother, restaurant server, eviction notice waiting at the end of the week, had accidentally purchased what might be the most valuable collection of pre-Columbian artifacts ever discovered in the United States. Lucia appeared beside her, looking at the screen. Mama, those mirrors are beautiful. Can we keep one when we sell the rest? The question revealed assumptions Rosa wasn't ready to examine. When we sell, not if. Her daughter had already moved past possibility into certainty, the way children did when they trusted their parents to make impossible things happen. We'll see, Mija. First we have to meet with the expert and figure out what's legal and what's not. At 1:30 p.m., Rosa and Lucia got back in the Civic and drove toward Westwood. UCLA's campus sprawled across hundreds of acres, intimidating in its size and the confidence it projected. Rosa had never been to college. She'd gone straight from high school to restaurant work, then marriage, then motherhood, each transition closing doors before she'd known they were open. Dr. Patricia Reyes's office occupied a corner of Haynes Hall, reached through hallways lined with artifacts behind glass and photographs of dig sites spanning continents. Rosa knocked on the door marked with a nameplate that read, Dr. Reyes, Maritime Archaeology. Come in. The office was small, but organized with the precision of someone who valued efficiency. Dr. Reyes stood from behind her desk, a woman in her mid-50s, gray streaking through black hair, wearing jeans and a UCLA sweatshirt that suggested she'd been working rather than meeting visitors. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct. Ms. Delgado. Lucia. Thank you for coming. Kevin Shun called me this morning with a story I'm still having trouble believing, but his photographs don't lie. Please sit. Rosa and Lucia took the chairs facing the desk. Dr. Reyes settled back in her own seat, pulling up images on her computer screen. Before we discuss legal implications and next steps, I need to ask you directly. Do you understand what you found? Not the dollar value, the historical significance? Rosa chose her words carefully. I understand these mirrors are rare. I understand they come from civilization that was destroyed. I understand they're important to history. But I'm also a single mother 3 days from eviction who bought salvage rights because they cost $1. So if you're asking whether I appreciate the mirror's academic value more than their monetary value, I can't lie and say yes. I need the money. My daughter needs stability. We need this to matter in practical terms. Dr. Reyes's expression softened. Good. I appreciate honesty. Too many people in your position would pretend altruism while planning to sell everything to the highest bidder. The fact that you're admitting your needs means we can work together realistically. She turned her screen so Rosa could see. These are Kevin's photographs, enhanced and analyzed. I've shown them to 3 colleagues this morning, discreetly, and we're in agreement. These mirrors are almost certainly authentic late Aztec period, probably from the reign of Moctezuma II, which makes them approximately 500 years old. Their condition is remarkable given the circumstances. The value estimate Kevin gave you was conservative. My colleagues, and I believe you're looking at something closer to $812 million for the complete collection. The number hit Rosa like physical force. $812 million. More money than she could conceptualize. Enough to buy everything, solve everything, transform not just her life and Lucia's, but generations of lives that would follow. Dr. Reyes continued, her voice taking on the careful tone of someone delivering information that required full attention. But before you start planning how to spend that money, we need to address several critical issues. First, ownership. You purchased legitimate salvage rights at a legal auction. That gives you a strong claim, but it's not absolute. The county could challenge the original auction. The Mexican government could claim the mirrors as national patrimony. Museums could argue that artifacts of this significance belong in public trust rather than private hands. And then there are the practical problems of recovery, authentication, and sale. Rosa felt Lucia's hand slip into hers, the child's grip tight with uncertainty. What do I need to do to protect our rights? First, you need a lawyer who specializes in salvage law and cultural property. I know someone, Marcus Webb at Carson and Associates. He's handled cases involving shipwrecks and recovered artifacts. He works on contingency for discoveries like this, taking a percentage of final value rather than charging upfront fees. Second, you need to move quickly on recovery. The longer those mirrors sit in the harbor, the greater the risk of theft, deterioration, or legal complications. Third, you need to control the narrative. Once word gets out, media will be everywhere, and public opinion will influence legal proceedings and potential sales. Dr. Reyes pulled out a legal pad and started writing. Here's what I recommend. Tomorrow, Monday morning, we meet with Marcus Webb and file preliminary paperwork establishing your salvage claim formally. Simultaneously, We contact the county and make them aware you're pursuing recovery, which protects you from accusations of illegal salvage. Then we hire a professional recovery team. I know people who can raise that barge for a fraction of what commercial operators charge because they'll work for a percentage rather than fixed fees. We document everything, photograph everything, authenticate everything. The goal is to have the mirrors in secure storage within 2 weeks, legally documented and professionally cataloged. 2 weeks. Rosa's mind was spinning. I work 4 doubles at a restaurant. My rent is due in 3 days. My car needs an oil change. I don't have time to coordinate maritime salvage operations. Then you make time. Dr. Reyes's voice carried steel beneath sympathy. Because Rosa, $812 million doesn't come to people who wait for convenient timing. It comes to people who drop everything and fight for it. Herbert Morrison spent 20 years talking about these mirrors, but never had the resources or connections to prove what he'd found. You have both right now, sitting in this office. The question is whether you're willing to risk everything you have, which I understand is almost nothing, for a chance at everything you need. Lucia spoke up, her voice small but determined. Mama risks everything every day, just keeping us alive. This isn't different, it's just bigger. The child's words hung in the air, like an indictment of circumstance and a declaration of faith. Dr. Reyes looked at Lucia with visible respect, then back to Rosa. Your daughter understands something crucial. You're already operating at the edge of survival. This opportunity doesn't increase your risk significantly because you have so little to lose, but it offers the potential to never risk like that again. So yes, the next 2 weeks are going to be chaos. Yes, you'll face challenges and people trying to take this from you. But if you're smart and careful and willing to fight, you could actually win. Rosa took a breath that felt like the first real breath she'd taken since Kevin's surface from the harbor. Okay, what's the first step? First step is you quit your job at the Golden Coast. What? I can't quit. I need that income. Dr. Reyes shook her head. You need to focus completely on protecting and recovering these mirrors. Every hour you spend serving tables is an hour someone else could be filing legal challenges or planning to steal what you found. I'll advance you $5,000 from my research budget as a consulting fee for your cooperation with my documentation of this discovery. That covers your rent and living expenses for the next month. After that, you'll either have won and money won't matter, or you'll have lost and you'll find another serving job. But right now, this has to be your only priority. The offer was both generous and terrifying. Quit her job based on the promise of mirrors that might be taken away before she could claim them. Trust a woman she'd met 20 minutes ago. Bet everything on a long shot that had already beaten impossible odds just by existing. If I do this, if I quit and focus on the mirrors, I need something in writing. An agreement that says you're advancing the money and I'll pay it back if this doesn't work out. I don't take charity. Fair enough. Dr. Reyes pulled out a blank contract form and started filling in by hand. Consulting agreement, $5,000 advance, repayable from proceeds of mirror sale if recovery is successful, forgiven if recovery fails due to circumstances beyond your control. We'll both sign it, and you'll have your copies. She finished writing and slid the document across the desk. Rosa read it twice, checking for traps or implications she might miss. The terms were exactly as Dr. Reyes had stated. Simple, direct, fair. She signed her name, Rosa Maria Delgado, the signature she'd used on her marriage license and divorce papers, and every lease agreement that had documented her slow slide from stability to crisis. Lucia watched with the seriousness of someone witnessing something momentous, even if she couldn't fully understand the implications. Dr. Reyes countersigned and handed Rosa a check for $5,000. First thing tomorrow morning, deposit this. Then call Marcus Webb. I'm texting you his information right now. Tell him I referred you and that it's urgent. He'll know what that means. Then call your restaurant and quit. Be polite but firm. You're not negotiating, you're informing. What about media? When does this go public? Not until we're ready. Kevin agreed to keep quiet for now. I'm not discussing it with anyone outside 3 trusted colleagues who understand confidentiality. You don't tell friends, family, neighbors. Nobody. The moment word leaks, you'll have treasure hunters, news crews, and legal vultures circling. We control the timing, which means we control the narrative. Rosa stood, legs unsteady, holding a check that represented more money than she'd had in 6 months, but infinitely less than what waited beneath 24 feet of harbor water. Thank you. I don't know if I'm making the right choice, but thank you for making it possible to choose. You're making the brave choice. Whether it's right depends on what happens next. But Rosa, I've spent 30 years studying maritime archaeology. I've seen important discoveries lost because people weren't willing to fight for them. Don't let that happen here. These mirrors survived conquest, survived centuries underwater, survived being forgotten. They deserve an owner who'll fight just as hard to protect them. The drive home from UCLA took 90 minutes through Saturday afternoon traffic. Rosa spent most of it in silence, processing decisions that felt simultaneously inevitable and insane. Lucia dozed in the passenger seat. Exhausted by emotions she was too young to fully process but old enough to recognize as significant. Rosa's phone buzzed with a text from Kevin Shun. How'd a meeting go? Dr. Reyes reliable? She typed back with one hand while stopped at a red light. Meeting went well. Moving forward with recovery. Thank you again for everything. Glad to hear it. One more thing. I noticed some unusual activity near Terminal Island this afternoon. 2 guys in a Zodiac, diving equipment, acting like they were looking for something specific. Might be nothing, but watch your back. Word travels fast in the salvage community, even when people try to keep quiet. Rosa's stomach tightened. Someone was already looking. Maybe coincidence, maybe not, but the timing felt deliberately wrong. She'd owned the barge for exactly 2 days, and already people were circling. At home, she deposited Lucia on the couch with instructions to rest while Rosa figured out dinner. But first, she opened her laptop and searched for Marcus Webb, attorney at law. His website projected quiet competence rather than flashy promises. 30 years of experience in maritime and salvage law. Successfully represented clients in 12 major recovery cases. Specialization in cultural property and international claims. Reviews from past clients praised his thoroughness and his willingness to take on difficult cases others avoided. Rosa sent an email through the contact form, keeping it brief. Dr. Patricia Reyes from UCLA referred me regarding a significant salvage discovery. I need legal representation urgently. Available to meet tomorrow, if possible. Rosa Delgado. The response came within 5 minutes. Ms. Delgado, Patricia called me this afternoon. I've cleared my Monday morning to meet with you. 9 a.m. at my office in Long Beach. Bring all documentation related to your salvage purchase and any evidence of discovery. This is going to move fast, so prepare yourself. Marcus Webb. Rosa sent a confirmation, then closed the laptop and stared at the check Dr. Reyes had given her. $5,000. It could cover rent for 4 months if she stretched it carefully. Or it could be seed money for a gamble that might pay $800 million or might leave her unemployed and facing eviction anyway. She thought about calling her mother in Mexico, about sharing this impossible news with someone who'd known her since birth, who'd watched her struggle through divorce and poverty and the daily grind of survival. But Dr. Reyes's warning echoed. Tell nobody. Control the narrative. Rosa folded the check and put it in her wallet, then started making dinner from ingredients that would have to last another week because she hadn't gone shopping yet and wouldn't until the check cleared. Lucia wandered into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mama, are we going to be okay? The question was simple, but carried weight from 8 months of uncertainty. Rosa knelt down to her daughter's eye level, taking small hands in hers. I don't know exactly what happens next, but I know we're going to try. And I know that sometimes trying is all we can do. Your mama bought a sunken boat for $1 because we needed hope more than we needed sense. Now that boat might actually save us. Might. It's not certain, but it's possible. And possible is more than we had last week. What if people try to take it from us? Then we fight. Not with fists, but with lawyers and laws and the fact that we own legal salvage rights. Nobody can just steal what's ours, even if they want to. Lucia considered this with the seriousness that had become her default expression since the divorce. Daddy wanted to take me from you during the custody thing. But you fought and won. That was different. Not really. You had the law on your side then, too. And you didn't give up even when his lawyer was mean and said bad things about us. This is the same, just with mirrors instead of me. Rosa pulled Lucia into a hug, feeling tears threaten for the first time since Kevin had surfaced with news of Obsidian and millions. Her daughter was right. This wasn't fundamentally different from every other fight Rosa had survived. Resources didn't determine victory. Determination did. And she'd proven she could outlast people with more money, more education, more everything except the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. You're right, Mija. It's the same fight, just bigger. Then we'll win, because you always win the important fights. Rosa wished she had her daughter's faith. But faith or not, she'd committed. Tomorrow she'd deposit the check, meet with Marcus Webb, and quit her job. The next 2 weeks would determine whether buying a barge for $1 was the best decision she'd ever made or the final mistake that pushed them past recovery. Sunday passed in a blur of nervous energy. Rosa couldn't stop refreshing her bank account on her phone, waiting for Dr. Reyes's check to clear. It finally posted at 6 p.m., transforming her balance from $847 to $5,847. More money than she'd seen in one place since before the divorce. She paid rent immediately, transferring $1,200 to her landlord through the portal they used. The transaction confirmed within seconds, and the tight knot in her chest that had been growing for 3 days finally loosened. They weren't getting evicted. Not this month, anyway. Lucia noticed the shift in Rosa's demeanor. You seem less worried. Rent's paid. That's one less thing to think about. How many more things are there? Rosa counted mentally. Legal fees, recovery costs, potential challenges from county or government, theft risk, authentication requirements, sale negotiations if they got that far, media management. The list went on. A lot of things, but we'll handle them one at a time. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous anticipation Rosa associated with first days of school or job interviews. She dressed in her best clothes, which meant black slacks from Target and a blouse that was only slightly faded from washing. Lucia wore her school uniform since Rosa would be dropping her at the neighbor's afterward. Explaining the situation to an 8-year-old in a way that didn't terrify her was one more challenge Rosa hadn't figured out yet. Marcus Webb's office occupied the second floor of a building in Long Beach that looked like it had been nice in the 1970s and was holding on to that glory through sheer determination. The lobby directory listed his firm alongside a bail bondsman and a CPA. Not prestigious, but not concerning either. Real work happened in places like this, not in glass towers downtown. The receptionist, a woman in her 60s who looked like she'd been answering phones since Carter was president, greeted Rosa with professional courtesy. Ms. Delgado, Mr. Webb is expecting you. Please go right in. Marcus Webb's office was exactly what Rosa had expected from his website. Neat but not obsessive. Lined with books that looked used rather than decorative. A desk covered in organized stacks of files. And behind it, a man in his mid-50s with gray hair, sharp eyes, and the weathered face of someone who'd spent time on boats as well as in courtrooms. He stood when Rosa entered, extending his hand. Ms. Delgado, thank you for coming. Patricia filled me in on the basics, but I'd like to hear the story from your perspective before we discuss legal strategy. Rosa sat and told him everything. The auction, the $1 bid, Kevin's dive, Dr. Reyes's analysis, the mirror's estimated value. She pulled out the documentation folder and spread it across his desk. The original purchase receipt, Herbert Morrison's newspaper clipping, the survey map, printed photographs from Kevin's underwater camera. Marcus examined each document with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that details mattered more than dramatic presentations. When he finished, he leaned back his chair and steepled his fingers. Your salvage claim is solid. You purchased legitimate rights at a county auction. The vessel had been abandoned for decades. Nobody challenged the auction or claimed prior ownership. That puts you in strong legal position. However, we have several potential challenges to address. He pulled out a legal pad and started listing issues. First, the county could argue the original auction was flawed. If they didn't properly advertise or follow procedure, they might try to invalidate the sale. We'll need to review their auction records and confirm everything was done correctly. Second, the Mexican government could claim these mirrors as cultural patrimony. Mexico has been aggressive about recovering pre-Columbian artifacts, and they have legal mechanisms to challenge private ownership. Third, maritime archaeologists and museums will argue that items of this historical significance should be in public institutions rather than private hands. They can't legally force you to donate, but they can create public pressure and complicate sales. Rosa's hope dimmed with each point. So even though I legally own the salvage rights, people can still take this away. They could try, but here's what they're up against. You're not a treasure hunter who illegally plundered an archaeological site. You're not a smuggler who stole artifacts from Mexico. You're a single mother who bought abandoned salvage rights at a legitimate auction, discovering valuable cargo by accident. That narrative matters. Courts and public opinion respond to good faith purchasers differently than they respond to thieves or opportunists. We lean into that narrative hard. Marcus pulled out a contract. Here's my standard agreement for salvage cases. I work on contingency, taking 20% of net proceeds after recovery costs. If we don't successfully recover and sell the mirrors, you owe me nothing. If we do, I get 20% and you get 80% of whatever remains after expenses. Sound fair? Rosa did the math quickly. 20% of 800 million was 160 million, leaving her with roughly 640 million minus recovery costs. Still more money than she could conceptualize, even with the lawyer taking a substantial cut. That seems fair. But what are typical recovery costs? For something like this, probably 2 to 3 million. Specialized salvage equipment, security during recovery, authentication by multiple experts, climate-controlled storage, insurance. It adds up, but we can defer most costs by negotiating percentage deals with service providers. Everyone wants a piece of an $800 million discovery. We use that to our advantage. Rosa signed the contract, her signature feeling more confident than it had with Dr. Reyes. This was forward movement. This was taking control of a situation that had felt overwhelming 24 hours ago. Marcus made a copy of her signed agreement and handed her the original. First action item. I'm filing paperwork today with the county clerk establishing your formal salvage claim. That creates public record and starts the clock on any challenges. Second, I'm contacting the harbor master to inform them of your recovery plans. We'll need permits, but getting ahead of bureaucracy helps. Third, I'm reaching out to my contacts about recovery teams. Patricia mentioned Kevin Chun. I know him, good diver, trustworthy. We'll need a crew of at least 6 people plus specialized equipment. I can have them ready by end of week. End of week? That's 4 days. Which is 4 days for word to leak, treasure hunters to get ideas, or legal challenges to materialize. The faster we move, the fewer problems we face. Once those mirrors are in secure storage and professionally documented, your legal position becomes nearly unassailable. While they're sitting on the harbor floor, you're vulnerable. Rosa understood the urgency, but felt overwhelmed by the pace. 72 hours ago, her biggest concern had been making rent. Now she was coordinating maritime salvage operations worth hundreds of millions. Marcus seemed to read her expression. I know this is a lot, but Rosa, you're not alone in this. My job is handling the legal and logistical complexity so you can focus on protecting your interests. Trust me when I say, I've done this before. Not at this value level. This is unprecedented, but I know how to navigate salvage claims and cultural property disputes. You made the right call coming to me. Dr. Reyes made the right call referring me. I had no idea where to start. Patricia is good people. We've worked together on 3 previous cases. She understands that discoveries like this should benefit the people who make them, not just enrich institutions that already have resources. She'll document everything for academic purposes, but she'll also make sure you get paid fairly for what you found. They spent another hour discussing details. Timeline for recovery, security protocols, media strategy for when news inevitably broke, potential buyers if they pursued private sale versus auction. By the time Rosa left Marcus's office, she had a clear action plan and a growing sense that this might actually work. Her phone buzzed with a text from Tony at the Golden Coast. "Rosa, where are you? You're scheduled for the lunch shift today." Rosa had forgotten to call. Too much happening too fast. She found a quiet spot in the parking lot and made the call she'd been dreading. Tony answered on the second ring. "Rosa? What's going on? You never miss shifts without calling." "Tony, I'm sorry for the short notice, but I need to quit. Effective immediately. Something came up that requires my full attention, and I can't keep working at the restaurant." Silence on the other end, then Tony's voice, confused and slightly hurt. "What came up? Are you okay? Is it Lucia?" "Everyone's fine. I just have an opportunity that needs my complete focus. I know this is terrible timing, and I'm sorry for leaving you short-staffed. You've been good to me, and I appreciate everything you've done. But I can't explain more than that right now." "Is this about another job? Because, Rosa, if someone offered you more money, I could try to match it. You're one of my best servers. I don't want to lose you." The kindness in his voice made this harder. Tony had been decent when others weren't. He'd given her flexible scheduling when Lucia was sick. He'd looked the other way when Rosa took extra rolls home for dinner. He deserved better than a vague excuse and immediate resignation. "It's not another restaurant job. It's complicated, and I really can't discuss it. But Tony, thank you for understanding. We're trying to understand. I know this is unprofessional." Another pause, then resignation in his tone. "Okay, I won't push. But Rosa, if this opportunity falls through, you've got a place here. Just call me, and you're back on the schedule. No questions asked. Thank you. That means a lot." She hung up feeling guilty and relieved in equal measure. Quitting without notice wasn't something she'd ever done before. But Marcus was right. Every hour she spent serving tables was an hour she wasn't protecting $800 million in obsidian mirrors from people who would take them if given the chance. The rest of Monday disappeared into phone calls and paperwork. Marcus filed the salvage claim. Dr. Reyes sent her preliminary authentication reports confirming the mirror's likely origin and value. Kevin coordinated with a recovery crew he'd worked with before, assembling a team of 6 divers plus support staff willing to work for percentage points rather than fixed fees. By Tuesday morning, they had a plan. Recovery would happen Saturday, 6 days from now. Marcus had secured emergency permits from the harbor master by explaining this was time-sensitive salvage of historically significant artifacts at risk of deterioration. The county had been notified and hadn't objected yet, which Marcus took as positive sign. But Tuesday also brought the first concerning news. Marcus called at 10 a.m. with an edge to his voice Rosa hadn't heard before. "We have a problem. Someone filed a claim this morning challenging your salvage rights. A man named Victor Morrison, claiming to be Herbert Morrison's estranged son. He's arguing that his father's purchase of salvage rights was made while Herbert was mentally incompetent, which makes the original transaction void. If the court agrees, the salvage rights revert to the county, and they'd have to auction them again." Rosa's stomach dropped. "Can he do that? I bought the rights legally at auction." "He can try. Whether he succeeds depends on proving Herbert was incompetent in 1987 when he bought the salvage rights. That's a high bar to clear, especially since Herbert maintained those rights for 33 years without anyone questioning his competency. But it complicates things. The court scheduled a hearing for next Monday to address the challenge. We'll need to respond with evidence that your purchase was legitimate and that Victor's claim is opportunistic rather than legally sound. What happens to the recovery plan? We proceed as scheduled. The challenge doesn't automatically stop us from recovering the mirrors. It just means Victor is positioning himself to contest ownership once we bring them up. So we need to win in court, which means we need to build a strong case fast. Rosa felt the familiar weight of crisis settling back on her shoulders. For 48 hours, she'd allowed herself to believe this might actually work. Now reality reasserted itself. Nothing came easy, nothing came clean, and every piece of good fortune attracted vultures looking to take it away. What do we need for court? Documentation showing Herbert Morrison was competent in 1987 and remained so until his death. Medical records, if available, testimony from people who knew him, evidence he managed his affairs rationally. I'm already tracking down Herbert's estate attorney and his primary care physician. But Rosa, this is going to cost money. Court time, research, expert witnesses. I'm working on contingency, but some expenses can't be deferred. We're looking at maybe $20,000 to fight this challenge properly. $20,000. Rosa had $5,000 in her account. I don't have that kind of money. I know, which is why I'm advancing the costs myself and adding them to the contingency structure. If we win, I recover the $20,000 plus my percentage. If we lose, I eat the loss. But Rosa, this is important. We can't let Victor Morrison derail this based on bullshit claims about his father's mental state. Herbert was eccentric, but eccentric isn't incompetent. Why is Victor doing this? If he thought his father was incompetent, why wait until now to challenge things? Because until Saturday, nobody knew the barge contained $800 million in Aztec mirrors. Victor thought his dad was a delusional old man chasing fantasies. Now he realizes the fantasies were real, and he wants a piece. Classic opportunistic heir behavior. They ignore you until you have something valuable. Then suddenly they care deeply about family and inheritance rights. Rosa thought about Marco, about how he disappeared until Lucia was old enough to be interesting, then try to claim shared custody purely to reduce child support obligations. Men who valued money over family followed predictable patterns, regardless of the specifics. What I need to do to help? Be prepared to testify if necessary. Tell the truth about how you came to purchase the salvage rights. Let the judge see you're not a schemer or opportunist. You're a single mother who bought something nobody wanted and discovered it had value through legitimate investigation. The narrative matters as much as the law here. They hung up, and Rosa sat staring at her phone, processing this new threat. Victor Morrison was a stranger trying to steal what she'd found because his father had been right all along about treasure beneath the harbor. The injustice of it burned. Herbert had spent 20 years being mocked for his beliefs. His family had apparently dismissed him as crazy. Now that he'd been vindicated posthumously, they wanted to profit from the obsession they'd ridiculed. Rosa wouldn't let that happen. She'd fought Marco for custody of Lucia and won. She'd fought eviction and job loss and poverty and won, in the sense that she and her daughter were still together, still surviving. She'd fight Victor Morrison the same way, with truth, with law, and with the stubborn refusal to let opportunists take what wasn't theirs. Wednesday brought media attention Rosa hadn't anticipated. Someone had leaked information to a local news blog that ran a story titled, "Local Woman Claims Ownership of Aztec Treasure Worth Hundreds of Millions." The article was light on facts, but heavy on speculation, quoting anonymous sources about mirrors and maritime salvage and legal disputes. Rosa's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. with calls from reporters wanting interviews. She ignored them all, following Marcus's advice to say nothing publicly until after the court hearing. But ignoring calls didn't stop her neighbors from reading the article, and by noon, 3 people had knocked on her door asking if the story was true, if she was really rich now, if she needed any help with anything. Rosa kept her answers vague and polite. "I can't discuss ongoing legal matters. Please respect my privacy." But privacy was becoming a luxury she couldn't afford. By evening, a news van had parked across the street from her apartment, and a reporter with perfect hair was filming a stand-up segment in front of their building. Lucia watched from the window with wide eyes. "Mama, why are they talking about our house on TV?" "Because people are interested in the mirrors. But we don't talk to them, okay? Everything we say goes through Mr. Webb first. That's how we protect ourselves. Like how you told me not to talk to Daddy's lawyer during the custody thing." Exactly like that. Marcus called at 8 p.m., his voice tight with controlled frustration. "I know who leaked the story. Victor Morrison's attorney has been shopping it to media outlets, trying to create public pressure and complicate your claim. It's a common tactic, make you look greedy or opportunistic, so the court sees his challenge more sympathetically. What do we do about it? We tell our story first on our terms. I'm setting up an interview with a reputable journalist for Friday afternoon. You, me, Dr. Reyes, and Kevin will present the facts cleanly. How you purchased legitimate salvage rights. How Kevin discovered the mirrors during a routine dive. How we're following all proper procedures for recovery and authentication. We control the narrative before Victor's attorney can twist it further. Rosa's hands were shaking. She hated being in the spotlight, hated the attention and scrutiny. But Marcus was right. Silence let others define the story. Okay, Friday afternoon. What do I wear? What do I say? Wear what you're wearing now. Regular clothes, nothing fancy. Say exactly what happened with no embellishment. Let the facts speak for themselves. You're not a treasure hunter. You're a mother who bought salvage rights because they cost $1, discovering valuable cargo by accident. That's the truth, and truth is your best defense. Thursday passed in a blur of preparation. Marcus sent Rosa a list of potential questions and suggested answers, drilling her on how to stay on message without sounding scripted. Dr. Reyes called to review authentication procedures and explain why the mirrors were historically significant. Kevin checked in about security concerns, noting that the news coverage had attracted unwanted attention to Terminal Island. I saw two different groups of people near the dock today, Kevin reported. One looked like media filming background footage. The other was three guys in diving gear who got real interested when I told them the area was private property. Rosa, you need to understand, $800 million makes people desperate. Some of them won't wait for legal processes. They'll try to take what they can before Saturday's recovery. Marcus arranged for private security to patrol Terminal Island starting Friday morning. Two former Coast Guard officers working for a security company that specialized in maritime protection. The cost was $7,000 for 3 days, added to the growing list of expenses Marcus was advancing. Friday afternoon arrived with the kind of California sunshine that made everything look deceptively perfect. The interview was scheduled at Marcus's office, neutral territory that looked professional without being intimidating. The journalist, a woman named Claire Santos from the Los Angeles Times, arrived with a photographer and recording equipment. Claire was younger than Rosa expected, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back and an expression that suggested she took her work seriously. She shook hands with everyone, set up her recorder, and began with straightforward questions. Ms. Delgado, can you walk me through how you came to purchase salvage rights to the barge? Rosa told the story simply, keeping to facts. The auction, the $1 bid, the impulse decision, the documents she'd received. She pulled out Herbert Morrison's newspaper clipping and showed it to Claire, explaining how she'd learned about the barge's mysterious cargo. And you had no idea the barge contained valuable artifacts when you purchased the salvage rights? None. I bought it because it cost $1 and I was curious. I'm a single mother working as a server. I don't have money for treasure hunting or sophisticated salvage operations. This was impulse, maybe desperation, but not any kind of calculated plan. Claire turned to Kevin. Mr. Chun, you discovered the mirrors during your dive. Can you describe what you saw? Kevin pulled up photographs on his laptop, showing them to Claire while describing his dive in technical terms that conveyed expertise without sounding inflated. The mirrors are wrapped in deteriorated oilcloth, stacked in the forward hold. Based on what I could see, there are at least 50, possibly more. The craftsmanship is consistent with late Aztec period. If Dr. Reyes's authentication is correct, this is the largest cache of pre-Columbian obsidian mirrors ever discovered outside Mexico. Dr. Reyes provided historical context, explaining the mirrors' significance and why they'd survived centuries underwater. Her academic credentials lent weight to claims that might otherwise sound fantastic. Marcus explained the legal framework, emphasizing that Rosa had followed every proper procedure, that her salvage claim was legitimate, and that challenges from opportunistic heirs didn't invalidate her legal rights. Claire took notes throughout, asking follow-up questions that were pointed but fair. When the interview concluded, she seemed satisfied she had the real story rather than speculation. This will run in Sunday's paper, Claire said. Front page of the California section. I think readers will be interested in how an everyday person stumbled into something extraordinary. But Ms. Delgado, be prepared for the attention this will bring. Stories like this go viral. You're going to have people coming out of the woodwork with claims and offers and threats. Protect yourself. Rosa thanked her and watched Claire leave, feeling like she'd just passed some kind of test. Marcus seemed pleased with how the interview had gone, calling it solid damage control against Victor Morrison's narrative manipulation. But Rosa couldn't shake the feeling that they were building a house of cards in a windstorm. Every piece fit together perfectly until you remembered that one strong gust could scatter everything. Saturday morning arrived with fog rolling in from the Pacific, turning Terminal Island into something from a ghost story. Rosa stood at the dock's edge watching 6 divers prepare equipment, while Marcus coordinated with the security team he'd hired. Lucia stayed close to Rosa's side, wearing a life jacket Kevin had insisted on despite them being nowhere near the water's edge. The recovery barge Marcus had chartered sat anchored 30 feet from shore, its crane positioned over the approximate location of the sunken vessel. The operation had cost more than Rosa wanted to think about. Equipment rental, diving crew, crane operator, safety personnel, documentation team. Dr. Reyes was there with 2 graduate students, cameras ready to record every stage of recovery for academic purposes. Kevin approached, wearing his wet suit, regulator in hand. We're ready to start. First phase is securing lift cables around the barge's hull. That'll take about 90 minutes. Once cables are secure, we'll start the lift slowly. The structure's been underwater for 40 years, so we need to be careful about collapse or shifting cargo. Rosa nodded, her stomach tight with anxiety. What if the mirrors break during the lift? Obsidian is fragile, but they've survived this long. The oilcloth wrapping should provide some protection. Worst case, we might lose a few to breakage, but the majority should come up intact. And best case, Kevin's smile was cautious. Best case, we recover 50 pristine pre-Columbian mirrors worth collectively more than most people make in 10 lifetimes, and you become the most successful accidental treasure hunter in American history. He descended into the water with his team, leaving Rosa to wait. Waiting had become her primary occupation over the past week. Waiting for legal filings, waiting for news, waiting for challenges or catastrophes or miracles. The fog made visibility poor, but Rosa could track the divers by their bubbles breaking the surface. Marcus stood beside her, phone in hand, monitoring multiple situations simultaneously. Judge Brenner's clerk confirmed Monday's hearing is still on schedule. Victor Morrison's attorney filed additional paperwork yesterday arguing that Herbert's purchase was fraudulent, that he somehow knew the barge contained valuable cargo and hid that information from the county. It's a desperate argument with no evidence, but it muddies the water. Can they stop us from recovering the mirrors today? They could try for an emergency injunction, but they haven't filed one yet. My guess is they're waiting to see what we actually find. If the mirrors aren't as valuable as estimated, Victor might drop the whole thing. If they're worth what Dr. Reyes thinks, he'll fight harder. Lucia tugged on Rosa's jacket. Mama, I'm cold. Rosa pulled her daughter close, sharing body heat. The fog had brought a chill that cut through their clothes despite it being late August. We won't stay much longer. Once they secure the cables, we can wait at the car. But Rosa couldn't leave. Something about this moment felt too significant to experience secondhand. She'd bought these salvage rights for $1. She'd risked everything on the possibility that Herbert Morrison had been right about hidden treasure. Now, 42 feet below the surface, divers were proving that risk had been justified. 90 minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Lucia dozed against Rosa's side. Marcus took 3 phone calls. Dr. Reyes photographed the operation from every angle. Security personnel maintained a perimeter that kept curious onlookers at a distance, though Rosa counted at least 20 people watching from beyond the barriers. Kevin surfaced, climbing the ladder onto the recovery barge. He removed his regulator and shouted across the water. Cables are secure. Starting the lift. The crane's engine roared to life, and massive cables went taut. For long seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, water began churning as something large rose from the harbor floor. Silt clouded the surface, making it impossible to see details. But gradually, through the murk, the barge's outline emerged. It looked smaller than Rosa had imagined, maybe 35 feet long and 12 feet wide, its wooden hull dark with age and covered in marine growth that made it resemble something organic rather than man-made. As it broke the surface completely, water poured from gaps in the planking, and Rosa held her breath, terrified the whole structure would collapse and spill its contents into the harbor. But the barge held. The crane operator worked with careful precision, lifting the vessel higher until it cleared the water entirely, then swinging it slowly toward a flatbed truck Marcus had positioned on the dock. The operation took 20 minutes of minute adjustments and tense waiting before the barge finally settled onto the truck bed with a groan of stressed wood. Kevin and his team emerged from the water, exhausted but triumphant. Dr. Reyes rushed forward with her graduate students, cameras recording as they approached the barge. Rosa followed, Lucia's hand tight in hers, both of them afraid to hope too much. The barge's hold was sealed with canvas tarps that had deteriorated but not completely failed. Beneath them, wooden crates sat stacked in organized rows. The wood had swollen from decades underwater, but the basic structure remained intact. Kevin used a pry bar to open the nearest crate. The wood splintered easily, revealing layers of oilcloth wrapped around, something flat and rectangular. He peeled back the cloth carefully, and even through the grime and marine deposits, Rosa could see it. An obsidian mirror, maybe 18 inches in diameter, polished to a sheen that captured light like trapped darkness. The edges were carved with glyphs Rosa couldn't read, intricate patterns that spoke of craftsmanship from another age. Kevin lifted it carefully, and despite centuries underwater, the mirror's surface reflected his face with startling clarity. Dr. Reyes gasped audibly. It's authentic. The glyph pattern matches late Aztec dynastic work, probably from Moctezuma II's reign. This is real. They opened 5 more crates systematically, documenting each mirror before moving to the next. Every one showed similar craftsmanship, similar preservation, similar impossible beauty. By the time they'd surveyed the hold's contents, they'd counted 47 mirrors in the forward section, with 3 additional compartments still sealed. Marcus was already on his phone with insurance companies, with transportation specialists, with secure storage facilities. We need these moved immediately. Every minute they sit exposed is a minute someone could try to steal them. I've arranged climate-controlled storage at a facility in Carson. Armed transport leaves in 30 minutes. The next 2 hours passed in controlled chaos. Mirrors were photographed, cataloged, carefully repacked in modern cushioning materials. Dr. Reyes worked with manic intensity, documenting every detail for academic record. Kevin coordinated with his dive team to explore the sealed compartments, discovering an additional 31 mirrors. 78 total. Not 50 as initially estimated, but 78 pristine obsidian mirrors from one of history's most sophisticated civilizations, preserved by accident in a barge that had been ignored for 40 years. Dr. Reyes did calculations on her phone, then looked at Rosa with an expression mixing awe and concern. Conservative estimate, assuming all 78 are authentic and in good condition, we're looking at total value around $1.2 billion. Rosa, you don't own a treasure. You own a national patrimony. The number hit Rosa like physical force. 1.2 billion. With AB, more than she could process, more than seemed real, more than any person should possess by accident. Lucia's voice cut through Rosa's shock. Mama, that's enough money that we never have to worry again, right? Rosa knelt down, pulling her daughter close. That's enough money that your grandchildren never have to worry. But Mija, we have to be very careful. People will try to take this from us. We have to be smart and protected and ready to fight. The armed transport arrived, 2 armored trucks with professional security teams. Mirrors were loaded with meticulous care, each one cushioned and secured. Dr. Reyes rode in the first truck, maintaining chain of custody for authentication purposes. Marcus rode in the second, coordinating with the storage facility. Rosa and Lucia followed in the Civic, part of a convoy that looked absurdly dramatic for Saturday afternoon Los Angeles traffic. But Marcus wasn't taking chances. $1.2 billion attracted attention from people who had resources and willingness to use them illegally. The storage facility in Carson occupied a nondescript industrial building that gave no indication of the treasures it held. Climate-controlled rooms, 24-hour security, biometric access controls. Marcus had rented a room large enough to hold all 78 mirrors with space for examination and documentation. They spent the next 4 hours arranging mirrors on custom-built racks while Dr. Reyes and her team photographed and measured each one. Kevin assisted, his diving expertise giving way to careful material handling. Lucia sat in a corner with a sketchbook, drawing mirrors from memory, her 8-year-old artistic interpretation somehow capturing their essence better than photographs. By 8 p.m., everyone was exhausted. Marcus called a meeting in the facility's conference room, ordering pizza because no one had eaten since morning. "Here's where we stand," he began, pulling up documents on his laptop. "All 78 mirrors are now in secure storage. Dr. Reyes has preliminary authentication on 47 of them, with full analysis to follow. Insurance is in place valued at $1.2 billion, costing us $200,000 per month, which is insane but necessary. Monday's court hearing will determine whether Victor Morrison has any legitimate claim to challenge your salvage rights. Assuming we win, which I'm confident we will, we'll need to address the next phase, actually selling or otherwise monetizing these mirrors." Dr. Reyes took over. From an academic perspective, these mirrors represent the most significant pre-Columbian discovery in decades. Museums worldwide will want them. The Mexican government will almost certainly file a claim under international patrimony laws. Private collectors will offer staggering amounts. But Rosa, you need to understand something. You can't just sell these on eBay. Cultural artifacts of this significance require careful negotiation with stakeholders who have legitimate interests: academic, cultural, historical. The process could take years. Rosa's exhaustion made her words come out sharper than intended. "Years? I can't wait years. I quit my job. I'm living on borrowed money. I need this to resolve in months, not years." Marcus raised a calming hand. "We can resolve the immediate financial pressure while working on long-term sale negotiations. Several museums have already reached out through intermediaries expressing interest in purchasing the entire collection. Preliminary offers range from $600 million to $800 million, well below market value, but guaranteed money. Alternatively, we could auction individually through Sotheby's or Christie's, potentially getting higher prices but taking longer. Or we could negotiate with the Mexican government for a finder's fee in exchange for repatriation, which would be politically complicated but might be fastest. What do you recommend?" Marcus considered carefully. "Personally, I think you negotiate with 2 or 3 major museums for the collection as a whole. You establish a floor price, say $750 million, and let them compete. The winning institution gets an unprecedented collection. You get $750 million minus my contingency fee and expenses. Everyone walks away satisfied. The process takes maybe 6 months from initial offer to final payment. $750 million. Even after Marcus took his 20% and recovery costs, Rosa would clear over $500 million. More money than her family had made in 10 generations combined. More money than she'd ever imagined possessing. But another part of her, the part that had learned to distrust easy answers, wondered what hidden costs came with. That money. What obligations, what pressures, what changes to her life and Lucia's that she couldn't predict. "Can I think about it? I need to process all of this." "Of course. But Rosa, we'll need to decide soon. The longer these mirrors sit in storage, costing $200,000 per month in insurance, the more financial pressure you're under. And the longer they're inaccessible, the more speculation and legal challenges we'll face. Speed protects you here." They finished pizza in exhausted silence. Lucia had fallen asleep across 3 chairs, her sketchbook tucked under her arm. Rosa carried her daughter to the car, the child's weight comforting in its familiarity. Some things didn't change even when everything else transformed. The drive home felt surreal. Rosa kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following them, though Marcus's security team had assured her they'd swept for surveillance. The streets looked the same, The same buildings, the same graffiti, the same homeless encampments under freeway overpasses. But Rosa felt different, like she'd crossed some invisible threshold that separated her old life from whatever came next. At home, she tucked Lucia into bed and sat in their small living room, staring at the walls that had witnessed 8 months of struggle. The eviction notice she'd received last month still sat on the kitchen counter, officially voided now, but kept as a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother in Mexico, who'd apparently heard rumors. "Mija, people are saying crazy things about treasure and millions of dollars. Call me when you can." Rosa typed back, "It's complicated but true. I'll explain soon. Everyone's okay." She wanted to call, to share this impossible news with someone who'd known her since birth, but exhaustion and caution won out. Tomorrow she could explain. Tonight she needed sleep before Monday's court hearing that would determine whether Victor Morrison could steal what she'd found. Sunday morning brought the Los Angeles Times article Claire Santos had written. Front page of the California section, exactly as promised. The headline read, "Single mother's $1 purchase leads to billion-dollar discovery of Aztec mirrors." The article was fair and thorough, presenting Rosa's story sympathetically while maintaining journalistic objectivity. Claire had included quotes from Dr. Reyes about the mirror's historical significance, from Marcus about the legal complexities, from Kevin about the discovery process. She'd also contacted Victor Morrison's attorney, who'd provided a statement calling Rosa's claim opportunistic seizure of family assets that rightfully belonged to Herbert Morrison's heirs. But the overall narrative favored Rosa. Claire had emphasized the $1 purchase, the accidental discovery, the careful adherence to legal procedures. She'd painted Rosa as an everyday person who'd stumbled into extraordinary circumstances and was trying to navigate them responsibly. The article went viral by noon. Rosa's phone exploded with notifications, friend requests, interview offers, investment pitches, marriage proposals, threats. She turned off all notifications except for calls from Marcus, Dr. Reyes, and Kevin, creating a bubble of silence in the storm of attention. Lucia read the article over Rosa's shoulder, her young face serious. "Mama, it says some people think we're bad for keeping the mirrors, that they should go back to Mexico." Rosa had been dreading this conversation. Some people believe artifacts belong to the countries where they originated. Others believe finders have rights. There's no simple answer, Mija. But what I know is that we followed every law, purchased legitimate rights, and discovered something accidentally. We're not thieves or grave robbers. We're people who bought salvage rights and found treasure. That doesn't make us bad. But what if Mexico needs the mirrors more than we need money? The question revealed Lucia's developing moral awareness in ways that made Rosa both proud and concerned. Her 8-year-old daughter was grappling with ethical complexities that most adults avoided. If Mexico makes a formal claim and offers fair compensation, we'll consider it seriously. But honey, we also have needs. You deserve college education, opportunities, security. These mirrors can provide that. It's not selfish to accept something valuable that came to us legally. It's just complicated. Lucia seemed to accept this, though Rosa could see her daughter processing layers she'd unpack over years to come. Some lessons couldn't be taught. They had to be lived and understood gradually. Monday morning arrived with the weight of judgment. The courthouse in Long Beach was an imposing structure of concrete and glass that made Rosa feel small as she climbed its steps with Lucia beside her. Marcus met them in the lobby, dressed in a sharp suit that projected confidence Rosa wished she felt. "Ready for this? Do I have a choice?" "Not really. But Rosa, we're in strong position. Victor Morrison's challenge is weak legally. He's arguing his father was incompetent 40 years ago, which requires evidence he doesn't have. We're arguing you purchased legitimate salvage rights through proper auction. Unless Judge Brenner is crazy, which she isn't, we win this." They entered courtroom 7, where Judge Patricia Brenner presided. She was in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back severely, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed documents. Victor Morrison sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with his attorney, a sleek man in his 40s who looked like he specialized in separating people from money through legal technicalities. Victor himself was maybe 50 years old, overweight, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. He looked like someone who'd worked regular jobs his whole life and suddenly saw a chance at wealth he'd never imagined. Rosa might have felt sorry for him if he wasn't trying to take what she'd found. Judge Brenner called the hearing to order. This is Morrison versus Delgado, case number CV 2024-7733. We're here to address Victor Morrison's challenge to salvage rights currently held by Rosa Delgado. Mr. Whitmore, you're representing the challenger. Please present your argument. Victor's attorney stood, and his presentation was exactly what Marcus had predicted, desperate and evidence-free. He argued that Herbert Morrison had been mentally incompetent when he purchased salvage rights in 1987, that he'd suffered from delusions about treasure, that the purchase itself was invalid due to diminished capacity. Your Honor, Herbert Morrison spent the last 20 years of his life claiming he'd found Spanish gold, talking about treasure that didn't exist, making wild promises he couldn't keep. These are hallmarks of someone not a sound mind. The county should never have sold him salvage rights, and my client, Herbert's only son, deserves opportunity to correct this historical injustice. Judge Brenner's expression suggested she'd heard better arguments from law students. Do you have medical records establishing your father's alleged incompetence in 1987? No, Your Honor, but testimony from physicians who treated him during that period? No, but his behavior, documentation of any legal proceedings declaring him incompetent, guardianship filings, anything official? No, Your Honor, but the pattern of behavior speaks for itself. Marcus stood, not bothering to hide his contempt. Your Honor, this is precisely the kind of opportunistic challenge we worried about. Victor Morrison had 40 years to question his father's competency. He filed nothing, challenged nothing, claimed nothing. Now that the salvage rights have proven valuable, suddenly he's concerned about his father's mental state 4 decades ago. This isn't legal argument. It's greed wearing judicial robes. Judge Brenner nodded. I'm inclined to agree, Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitmore, unless you can present actual evidence of incompetency rather than vague assertions about eccentric behavior, I'm dismissing this challenge. Eccentric does not equal incompetent. Herbert Morrison purchased salvage rights legally, maintained them for over 3 decades, and left them to whoever purchased his estate's assets. Ms. Delgado bought those rights through proper auction. The chain of title is clean. Victor's attorney tried one more desperate argument. Your Honor, the value of what was discovered is so extraordinary that equity demands nothing of the sort. Ms. Delgado took a risk on salvage rights nobody else wanted. The fact that her risk paid off doesn't invalidate her legal purchase. Challenge dismissed. Ms. Delgado's salvage rights are confirmed. The gavel came down with finality that made Rosa's knees weak. Lucia squeezed her hand hard enough to hurt. Marcus was smiling like he'd just won the Super Bowl. Victor Morrison stood, his face red with frustrated rage. This is bullshit. That treasure belongs to my family. My father spent his whole life searching for it. Judge Brenner's voice went cold. Mr. Morrison, I suggest you control yourself before I hold you in contempt. Your father found treasure, yes, but he also chose to maintain salvage rights rather than mount a recovery operation. Ms. Delgado did what he didn't. She actually recovered the cargo. The law rewards action, not intention. You're dismissed. Victor stormed out, his attorney following with mumbled apologies. Marcus gathered his materials with satisfied efficiency, while Rosa stood frozen, trying to process that they'd actually won. That's it? It's over? This challenge is over. There might be others, the Mexican government, maritime archaeologists, federal claims. But Victor Morrison is finished. You own those salvage rights free and clear. Outside the courthouse, media had gathered based on a viral article. Cameras and microphones surrounded Rosa as she emerged, and before she could panic, Marcus stepped forward with the smooth confidence of someone who'd done this before. Ms. Delgado has just prevailed in court against challenges to her legitimate salvage rights. She followed every proper procedure, purchased rights through legal auction and discovered valuable cargo through careful investigation. She's cooperating fully with academic institutions to document and authenticate the mirrors. She's committed to ensuring these artifacts are preserved and appreciated rather than hidden. Beyond that, we have no additional comment at this time. Marcus guided Rosa and Lucia through the crowd to his car, parked in a reserved spot that suddenly seemed very far away. Questions followed them. How does it feel to be a billionaire? What will you do with the money? Do you feel guilty keeping artifacts that belong to Mexico? But Marcus kept moving, not engaging, protecting them from saying something that could be used against them later. Safe in the car, Rosa finally let herself breathe. I can't believe we won. I told you Victor's challenge was weak. Judge Brenner is smart enough to recognize opportunistic garbage when she sees it. But Rosa, this is just the beginning. Now comes the harder part, actually converting these mirrors into money you can use. They drove back to Marcus's office where Dr. Reyes was waiting with news. 3 museums had submitted formal offers for the complete collection. The Smithsonian offered $600 million. The British Museum offered $700 million. And the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City had submitted a proposal through diplomatic channels offering $750 million as a finder's fee in exchange for repatriation of the mirrors to Mexican national collections. Dr. Reyes laid out the proposals on Marcus's conference table. Each has advantages and disadvantages. The Smithsonian offer is lowest but comes with tax benefits since it's a U.S. institution. The British Museum offer is higher but would require shipping internationally and navigating UK import laws. The Mexican offer is highest and comes with political advantages. You be celebrated as someone who returns stolen patrimony rather than exploiting it. But payment would take longer, maybe 18 months versus 6 months for museums. Rosa studied the documents, numbers blurring together. 600 million, 700 million, 750 million. All of them represented more wealth than she could comprehend, more money than her entire extended family had made in cumulative lifetimes. What do you recommend? Marcus answered carefully. Politically and morally, the Mexican offer makes sense. These mirrors came from Aztec civilization. Returning them to Mexico with fair compensation threads the needle between respecting cultural heritage and protecting your financial interests. But Rosa, it's your choice. You found them, you own them legally, you decide what happens. Lucia spoke up from where she'd been coloring quietly in the corner. Mama, if the mirrors came from Mexico, shouldn't they go back to Mexico? That's like if someone took our family photos and we wanted them returned. The childlike logic cut through complexity. Rosa looked at her daughter and saw values being formed in real time, the beginning of moral framework that would guide Lucia through her own life decisions. You're right, Mija. If these mirrors tell the story of Mexican ancestors, Mexican people deserve to see them and learn from them. Money matters, but some things matter more. She turned to Marcus and Dr. Reyes. Accept the Mexican government's offer. $750 million in exchange for complete repatriation of all 78 mirrors. Work out the payment timeline, but I want this resolved by end of next year. These mirrors have been hidden long enough. Time for them to go home. Dr. Reyes' smile was genuine and warm. That's an extraordinary decision, Rosa. You could have held out for more from private collectors, could have maximized profit. Choosing repatriation with fair compensation instead shows real character. Marcus made notes. I'll open negotiations tomorrow. Mexican government moves slowly, but with diplomatic channels involved, we should have preliminary agreement within a month. Final payment will take 12 to 18 months, as Dr. Reyes mentioned, but we can structure advances to cover your immediate needs. How much would an advance be? Standard for deals like this? 10 to 15% upfront. So 75 to 100 million within 90 days. Enough to stabilize your situation permanently while the rest processes. $75 million within 90 days. Rosa's brain stuttered, trying to process the timeline. 3 months from now, she'd have more money than she'd make in 1,000 lifetimes of restaurant work. Okay, let's do it. But Marcus, I need something in writing. A contract that protects Lucia if something happens to me. guarantees the money goes to her education and security, not to Marco or anyone else who might try to claim it. I'll draft a trust agreement today. You'll be primary beneficiary with Lucia as contingent beneficiary, protected from creditors and ex-spouses. The money will be yours to use, but structured to survive any legal challenges. They spent another hour working through details before exhaustion finally overwhelmed Rosa's ability to focus. She drove home with Lucia, both of them quiet, processing changes neither could fully comprehend. At the apartment, Rosa stood in the doorway, looking at their small space with new eyes. This place had been their refuge during the worst period of her life. These walls had witnessed her breaking down and rebuilding. This kitchen had produced meals stretched from almost nothing. This bathroom had heard Lucia crying about missing her father while Rosa promised things would get better. And now things were better, or would be soon. But Rosa felt disconnected from celebration, like she climbed a mountain only to discover the peak was shrouded in fog, the view obscured by uncertainty about what came next. Lucia seemed to sense her mother's mood. "Mama, are you happy?" The question deserved honesty. "I'm relieved. I'm grateful. I'm scared. I don't know if happy is the right word yet." "Why scared?" "Because everything changes now. We'll move, obviously. We'll have money for anything you need. But Mija, money changes people. I don't want it to change us in bad ways. I don't want you growing up thinking wealth makes you better than others or that problems can be solved by throwing money at them." Lucia climbed into Rosa's lap, 8 years old but still small enough to fit. "You won't let that happen. You're a good mama. You'll teach me to be good, too." Rosa held her daughter and felt tears finally come. The release of 8 months of pressure that had been building since Marco left, since eviction threatened, since poverty had become their constant companion. They'd survived. More than survived. They'd won a lottery they hadn't known they'd entered. But survival's habits died hard. Even knowing $75 million would arrive in 90 days, Rosa found herself calculating grocery budgets and avoiding unnecessary expenses. Poverty left scars that wealth couldn't immediately heal. The next 3 months passed in a blur of legal negotiations and media attention. The Mexican government's formal offer came through diplomatic channels, including provisions that made Rosa uncomfortable until Marcus explained they were standard. Authenticity verification, cultural export permits, tax structures, payment schedules. Marcus negotiated the advance from 10% to 15%, securing $112 million to be paid within 60 days of preliminary agreement. The numbers still didn't feel real, even when Rosa's bank account suddenly showed 8 digits instead of 3. She moved slowly at first, afraid sudden wealth would attract unwanted attention or make her a target. She paid off debts, not that she had many, but the freedom from owing anyone anything felt significant. She bought Lucia new shoes that actually fit and felt guilty about the relief that simple purchase brought. Dr. Reyes coordinated the mirror's authentication and cataloging, working with Mexican scholars who traveled to Los Angeles for the process. The mirrors were confirmed as authentic late Aztec period, probably from Moctezuma II's royal collection, possibly hidden during the Spanish conquest and smuggled out of Mexico sometime in the 1970s or early 1980s. How they'd ended up in a barge in Los Angeles harbor remained mystery, though Dr. Reyes theorized about art smuggling networks that had operated during that period. The formal repatriation ceremony happened 4 months after the court hearing. Rosa and Lucia flew to Mexico City. First-class tickets that felt absurd, but that Marcus insisted on for security reasons, and attended an event at the National Museum of Anthropology. The museum's director, a woman named Dr. Carmen Valdez, welcomed them personally. "Ms. Delgado, on behalf of Mexico, thank you for returning what was stolen from our ancestors. These mirrors tell our story, connect us to civilizations we're descended from. Your decision to repatriate them rather than sell to private collectors is an act of cultural respect we won't forget." The ceremony itself was formal but moving. 78 mirrors were displayed in a special exhibition titled Espejos del Imperio, El Retorno, Mirrors of Empire, The Return. Thousands of people attended the opening, many in tears as they viewed artifacts that connected them to heritage that had been stolen and was now restored. Rosa stood with Lucia watching families approach the mirrors, children pressing close to glass cases, adults reading descriptions with expressions mixing pride and grief. Lucia tugged on her sleeve. "Mama, I'm glad we gave them back. Look how happy people are." Rosa looked and saw what her daughter meant. These weren't museum-goers viewing abstract historical objects. These were people reconnecting with ancestors, with civilization, with identity that colonization had tried to erase. The mirrors weren't just valuable artifacts. They were witnesses to history, holders of collective memory, bridges between past and present. "Me too, Mija. Me too." The final payment processed 6 months later, exactly as contracted. After Marcus's contingency fee, recovery costs, and taxes, Rosa's net was $437 million. An incomprehensible amount that sat in accounts managed by financial advisors Marcus had vetted, structured to generate income without requiring Rosa to understand complicated investment strategies. She bought a house in San Pedro, not a mansion, but a comfortable 4-bedroom with a yardware. Lucia could play. She set up trust funds for Lucia's education and future. She donated $10 million to a scholarship fund for single mothers pursuing education. She gave her mother in Mexico enough money to retire comfortably. And then she did something that surprised even herself. She went back to school. Not because she needed a degree for employment, but because she'd always wondered what she might have accomplished if she'd gone to college instead of straight to restaurant work. UCLA accepted her into their history program, and at 32 years old, Rosa became a freshman. Dr. Reyes became an informal mentor, guiding her through academic waters that felt foreign but increasingly interesting. Lucia adjusted to their new normal with the resilience children possessed, making friends at her new school, excelling in classes, growing into someone who understood both privilege and gratitude. 2 years after the auction, Rosa sat in Dr. Reyes's office reviewing her thesis proposal on maritime archaeological discoveries and their impact on cultural patrimony debates. Through the window, she could see UCLA's campus, students moving between classes, lives being built incrementally through education and opportunity. Dr. Reyes finished reading and looked up with approval. "This is good work, Rosa. You're developing real, scholarly instincts. Have you thought about graduate school?" "Sometimes. But mostly I'm just trying to understand what happened to me, to us. Try to make sense of how buying salvage rights for $1 led to all of this. You know what I think happened? You took a risk nobody else would take. You followed through when others would have given up. You made ethical choices when greed would have been easier. The mirrors weren't a gift, Rosa. They were a reward for character." Rosa thought about Herbert Morrison, about how he'd been mocked for 20 years for believing in treasure that actually existed, about how Victor had only valued his father's obsession once it proved profitable, about how the mirrors had waited 40 years underwater for someone who would treat them with respect rather than just seeing dollar signs. Do you think Herbert knew? Really knew what was down there? I think Herbert believed when nobody else did. That takes courage, and I think you inherited that courage when you bought his salvage rights. Some things can't be purchased, only earned. Rosa left Dr. Reyes's office and walked across campus to where she'd parked. The Civic was gone, replaced by a sensible sedan that didn't announce wealth but provided safety and reliability. Some changes were necessary. Others felt like betraying the person she'd been. At home, Lucia was doing homework at the kitchen table, now large enough for both of them to work comfortably. She looked up when Rosa entered. "Mama, I have to write an essay about heroes for school. Can I write about you?" "I'm not a hero, Mija. You bought a sunken boat for $1 when everyone said you were crazy. You found treasure. You gave it back to the people it belonged to. You did it while being a good mama. That's a hero." Rosa sat beside her daughter, looking at the essay prompt. "Write about someone who showed courage when it was easier to give up." "Okay, you can write about me, but include Mr. Morrison, too. He kept believing for 20 years when everyone said he was wrong. That's courage. What about Grandpa Marco? Is he a hero?" The question caught Rosa off guard. Lucia rarely mentioned her father, who'd vanished to Arizona and had made no attempt to contact them even after news of the mirrors went public. Marco had demonstrated that his interest in his daughter was directly proportional to potential financial benefit, and when he'd realized he had no legal claim to Rosa's discovery, he'd disappeared again. Your father made choices that weren't heroic. But Lucia, people are complicated. Nobody's all good or all bad. Your father had problems he couldn't fix, and he dealt with them by leaving. That hurt us, but it doesn't mean he never loved you. Do you think he'll come back now that we have money? Maybe. Probably. But Mija, if he does, it'll be because he wants the money, not because he wants to be a father. You need to protect yourself from that disappointment. Lucia nodded with the seriousness of someone older than 10. She'd learned lessons about trust and loyalty that no child should have to learn, but that would serve her well as she grew into the complicated world of adulthood. That night, Rosa couldn't sleep. She got up and walked through their house, touching walls that belonged to them, furniture they'd chosen, space that was theirs without threat of eviction or fear of loss. 3 years ago, she'd been serving tables and counting pennies. Now she had resources that could support generations. But the mirrors haunted her, not with regret. Returning them to Mexico had been right, but with questions about why her, why this discovery, why $1 had led to everything. She thought about Aztec priests who'd used these mirrors for divination, looking into polished obsidian to see past and future simultaneously. She thought about Spanish conquistadors who destroyed most mirrors because they saw devils work in their reflective surfaces. She thought about smugglers who'd hidden them, about a barge deliberately sunk to protect cargo from discovery. And she thought about Herbert Morrison, obsessed and mocked, dying before he could prove himself right. About how his salvage rights had passed through a state auction to Rosa, who'd bid $1 on impulse, discovering what Herbert had always believed existed. The mirrors had waited, patient as only inanimate objects can be patient, waiting for someone who would see their value beyond monetary worth, who would recognize they belonged to people rather than private collections, who would choose respect over exploitation. Rosa had been that person, not because she was special, but because circumstance and character had aligned in that moment at the auction when she'd raised her hand for a barge nobody wanted. In the morning, Lucia found her mother asleep on the couch, phone still displaying photos of obsidian mirrors now housed in Mexico City. The child covered Rosa with a blanket and made breakfast quietly, not wanting to wake her. At school, Lucia's teacher asked about the essay assignment. "I'm writing about my mama," Lucia said. "She bought a boat for $1 and found treasure and gave it back because that was right. She says she's not a hero, but she is." The teacher smiled. Heroes rarely recognize themselves. What matters is how they act when it would be easier to do something else. Your mother sounds like someone who chose hard right over easy wrong. What's the difference? Easy wrong is taking what you can get without caring about consequences. Hard right is doing what should be done even when it costs you. Your mother could have kept those mirrors or sold them for more money. She chose hard right instead. Lucia thought about this and understood something fundamental about character and choice. Her mother had shown her through actions rather than words that wealth without integrity was just numbers, but integrity with wealth could change the world. 3 months later, the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City sent Rosa and Lucia VIP invitations to the permanent exhibition of the mirror collection. They flew down for a weekend, and Dr. Valdez personally guided them through the gallery. "These mirrors have been viewed by over 2 million people since they opened," Dr. Valdez explained. "School groups come daily. Families travel from across Mexico to see them. They've reconnected our people with heritage we thought was lost forever. Ms. Delgado, you gave us more than artifacts. You gave us back our history." Rosa stood in front of the largest mirror, 18 inches of polished obsidian that had survived conquest and theft and centuries underwater. Her reflection stared back, distorted slightly by ancient glass, showing her face alongside Lucia's, alongside other visitors, all of them connected through this object that had witnessed civilizations rise and fall. "I'm glad they're here," Rosa said. "This is where they belong." On the flight home, Lucia fell asleep against Rosa's shoulder. Rosa watched clouds pass beneath the plane and thought about journeys. Physical journeys across countries and oceans, but also internal journeys from desperation to stability, from poverty to wealth, from fear to confidence. She thought about the $1 purchase that had changed everything, about how small decisions could cascade into transformation, about how courage and luck were sometimes indistinguishable. And she thought about the future. Lucia would grow up with resources Rosa never had. She'd attend college, pursue dreams, build a life free from the constraints poverty imposed. She'd inherit wealth, yes, but more importantly, she'd inherit values, that some things mattered more than money, that cultural heritage deserved respect, that hard right beat easy wrong every single time. For years after the auction, Rosa graduated from UCLA with a degree in history. Dr. Reyes attended the ceremony, as did Marcus and Kevin and a delegation from the National Museum of Anthropology who'd become friends during the repatriation process. Lucia, now 12, watched her mother accept her diploma and felt pride mixed with understanding. Her mama had been a restaurant server who'd bought a sunken boat for $1. Now she was a scholar who'd returned one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the century to its rightful home. At the reception afterward, someone asked Rosa what she planned to do next. She thought about that question seriously. She had money, education, opportunities. She could do anything, go anywhere, be anyone. "I'm going to start a foundation," she said, supporting single mothers who want to pursue education but lack resources. Helping people take the risks I took when I had nothing to lose. Maybe some of them will find their own treasures. Maybe they'll just find themselves. Either way, I want to help. Dr. Reyes smiled. "That's perfect. What will you call it?" Rosa glanced at Lucia, at her daughter who'd been with her through everything: poverty, discovery, transformation. The Morrison Foundation. After Herbert, who believed when nobody else did. And after all the single mothers who believe in better futures despite everyone telling them to give up. That evening, standing in their house that had been purchased with $1 treasure, Rosa opened her laptop and began drafting the foundation's mission statement. The Morrison Foundation exists to support individuals who take risks in pursuit of better futures. We believe that courage, character, and persistence matter more than initial resources. We invest in people who others overlook, who purchase metaphorical $1 barges because they can't afford anything else but refuse to accept defeat. We honor Herbert Morrison, who believed for 20 years when everyone said he was wrong, and Rosa Delgado, who bought what nobody wanted and discovered it was priceless. Lucia read over her shoulder. "That's good, Mama, but you left something out." "What?" "You should say that treasure isn't always money. Sometimes treasure is believing in yourself when nobody else does. That's what you taught me." Rosa added that line, and it became the foundation's motto, printed on every grant letter, every scholarship award, every success story that followed. Years later, when journalists asked Rosa Delgado about the mirrors and the discovery and the money, she always brought the conversation back to the same point. "I bought salvage rights for $1 because that's all I had. I found treasure because I was willing to look where others wouldn't. And I returned it because some things matter more than personal wealth." But the real treasure wasn't the mirrors. It was learning that courage and character can transform everything if you're brave enough to take the risk. The mirrors remained in Mexico City, viewed by millions, connecting people to ancestors and heritage and history that colonization had tried to erase. They'd come home after centuries of exile, brought back by a woman who'd recognized they were worth more than money could measure. And Rosa Delgado, who'd once served tables for tips, who'd faced eviction and poverty and the daily grind of survival, had discovered that buying a barge for $1 wasn't the beginning of a treasure hunt. It was the beginning of understanding what treasure really meant. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.